Got 800 spiders out here, and they can't kill the one mosquito that keeps trying to dive bomb me. Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Let's talk about the Super Generation, the anthology coming out soon from Raconteur Press. A couple of my friends have published with them before. I've heard really good things. I kept an eye on their open submission calls for a few months. This prompt came along. It seemed like it was right up my alley. And so I started cooking up an idea. I worked on it for a couple of weeks, sent it off, and to my absolute fortune and delight, I got accepted into this one. It comes out on August 23rd, and I couldn't be more excited to share this one with you. The final product was a story that after I wrote it and edited it, I read through it a couple of times. I kept getting more and more excited, and I thought hopefully this excitement kind of translates over to the readers having the same experience with it. What's the premise? Well, their anthologies are themed, and in this one, the theme is, or the pitch is, in 1955, there's some kind of cosmic event that gives a whole bunch of people around the world superpowers. The powers aren't hereditary, and the event doesn't repeat. So just for a generation, there are superheroes. And now the sun is kind of setting on that generation. What's their legacy? How did they change the world? The year 1955 stuck out to me because I know that right around that time, my Papaw was recovering from some wounds that he had endured as a soldier in Korea. So I thought, why don't I write a story that was about a guy similar to my Papaw? And he's at the end of his career, but he's reflecting on some key moments in it and how he was able to change the world and what it means for the future. I won't give you much more than that just because it's an 8,000 word story. It's short enough to read. It might take you half an hour to sit down and get through the entire thing. So it wouldn't make much sense for me to give it away. Hint, hint, go buy the book. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about my Papaw and why I decided to write this story this way. When you're a little kid, it's almost like there's no bigger superhero than your grandparents. These kind of mythical figures that can tell your parents what to do, and they don't have to be bossed around by anybody, and they can buy all the cereal at the grocery store that you can't get at home, and it's just fantastic. When I was a little kid during the summers, my parents would occasionally ship us down to the grandparents in California. I grew up in Las Vegas. We get to spend a week with them here and there. My mama lived in Downey. My papa and his second wife lived in Corona, and my mom's parents lived in Burbank. And so we'd shuttle around and visit them and have a different experience every time. Well, my papa was a truck driver, and I didn't know much about his life before that, only that he drove trucks, he owned his own equipment, and we'd all take turns going out with him for the day in the semi. He'd run a load, run 2 or 3 loads, run some shipping containers around, just whatever work there was. I didn't even understand at the time that there was a limit on the hours that you could work. He told me that sometimes if he got too far away from home, he'd have to either sleep in the sleeper on the truck or he'd stay in a motel and he'd call Marianne, and that was that. It was just fun to spend a day bombing around in the truck and goofing off on the CB radio with Papaw. There was even one day when he let me drive the forklift, and I wrote a little comic for him about, hey, here's what I did on, I think I wrote down the date, and that's the weird thing about what sticks in my head. It was in 1994, so it was 30 years ago. I was like, here's what I did in July 94, and drew a little comic of me running the forklift with Papaw. And I gave it to him, and his wife, Marianne, we didn't call her grandma. She was just Marianne, but she was one of our grandmas. She said, that meant a lot to your Papaw. That was worth more to him than $1 million. And I thought it was just one of those sweet things that grandmas say. Come to find out about 10 years later, when my dad kind of gave me the backstory on his relationship with my Papaw growing up, things were difficult with him for a long time. For decades, my Papaw had been an alcoholic. And it took him a while to crawl out of that hole. But eventually he did, and he patched things up with my father right around the time that my siblings and I came along. And he was able to be there in our lives, and we have great memories of him. He died in 2001 when I was 16, just a few weeks shy of his 70th birthday. And it was a sad time for all of us, but we have many fond memories to recall him by. As time went on, I've been able to kind of piece some things together from his life. I know that he served in Korea. I don't know if he enlisted or if he was drafted. When I was 19, Marianne gave me this picture of him, and it made me do a double take at first because I thought that it was a picture that I had taken. Like Marianne and I had gone that summer maybe to a photo booth where they do old-timey photos, and I was like, oh, when did I take this? She goes, no, that's not you, that's your Papaw, that's your grandfather. And I was like, holy crap, I looked exactly like him. I would have never guessed because, let's see, this is mainly how I knew him, as this man in his 60s. And I was like, well, I told my wife, I was like, well, at least you'll know that I'll always look this good. No, when he was younger, he and I looked the same, and that's always been it's left a really strong impression on me. One of those summers when I was staying with him, he told me a little bit about his time in the war. It wasn't something that he talked about very often. Not like, oh, I'm traumatized, I don't say anything. It just didn't come up that much. But one time when he was digging through his office, he showed me the telegram, this little just tiny piece of paper. He said, I got hurt in the war, and I didn't know which war it was at the time. He just said, I got hurt in the service. And he showed me the telegram that they sent to my great-grandmother, Nora Patton. Said, your son Robert was minorly wounded in battle. We expect him to make a full recovery. He goes, minorly wounded my ass. I was in the infirmary for 14 months. A grenade had gone off behind him in Korea and filled his back full of shrapnel. It took him a year to get back completely on his feet. So that's part of something that I was able to work into the story. It turns out like that 1955 cosmic event healed him from his war wounds and turned the character into the superhero. I even based his name off of my Papaw. It was really easy to kind of dig into that family history off of the little bit of lore that I knew about him, and write this character kind of based on him. Of the few physical relics that I have for my Papaw, one of them is a combat infantryman badge. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that it was this pin that had kind of a long rifle on it, and it was one of the little pieces of his life that Marianne kind of distributed amongst my dad and my siblings after Papaw died. And so I've kept it. It's in a hutch in the house. I keep it safe. Later on, probably 2016, when I was working with a drilling and blasting company in Vegas, one of my coworkers was a veteran, and we got to talking about it. And I said, I've got this thing from my Papaw, but I don't know what it is. And I described it, and I looked it up. And he said, oh, that meant if he fought in Korea, he probably had to fix bayonets and kill people up close at some point. That was like a brutal upfront type of combat. And if he was an infantryman, then that's what his life was like. Later on as well, like remember a couple of weeks ago when I did that video of Hillbilly Elegy, the book by J.D. Vance, and he was talking about hillbilly culture. That's where my Papaw is from. The Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio, like that's what he was born and raised in. His father was a coal miner. And his father, my great-grandfather Wayne, died when my Papaw was 2 years old in a mining accident. He got electrocuted. And I don't know anything about Papaw's stepfather. I know that he was the youngest of 4 kids and the only boy, and that he grew up not knowing his biological father, and that he grew up in that culture. Then he goes to war in a very brutal physical type of combat. He gets blown up. Piecing all that together, it's not surprising that somebody in his situation and of his generation, when they didn't really know what PTSD was and you didn't talk about your feelings, you just treated what you felt with alcohol. I'm not at all shocked that he became an alcoholic for so long. I'm more surprised and impressed that he was able to eventually come out of it, given the support system and the tools that he had or didn't have. I never knew him to be a religious man. It's never something that came up. He was just my Papaw. He'd spoil us. We'd go hang out with him. We'd get to drive the truck. They'd take us to the movies. They'd take us to Toys R Us. I'd wake up in the morning and he'd already be gone, but I'd go into the kitchen and there was a bowl of Fruity Pebbles with a spoonful of sugar on top of it. And I would just assume that was meant for me, and he'd have a fantastic time. I have nothing but fond memories of the man. And I wanted to kind of write a story like this as a tribute to this figure who was larger than life in my childhood and who I still miss regularly when I think about him. He's been gone for almost 25 years now, but a story like this I thought would be a good tribute to the man. So knowing all of that, I hope you guys will check out the Super Generation when it comes out. I'm sure that I'll be spamming the links left and right, and I'll put it down in the description. I don't actually have the active link for it right now, but there's been some cover art. As a final note, one of the other selling points that really made me want to pitch to this anthology was the editor, Hinckley Correa, who is, if you know that last name, she's the daughter of Larry Correa. I thought, well, I've never met her before, but I've read some of her short stories and other anthologies that she's done, and I've been impressed with her work. And then I thought later, I was like, wait a minute, no, I actually have met her. I've met her twice. she wouldn't remember me. One of them was at LTUE, probably in like 2017 or so. I think she was already writing and publishing and stuff. But way before that, there was, I think it's a defunct writers conference now. It was called Conduit. I went in 2009 and 2010, and that was right after Larry Correia had published Monster Hunter International with Bane. And I had read it in 2009, completely loved it. He was riding high. He had a couple of other books and stuff coming out. And I think I got that one signed by him at Conduit in 2010. And he had his daughters with him. And they were like elementary school aged at the time. And I remember somebody asking, oh, do your daughters read your books? He's like, oh, hell yeah. I was like, awesome. Little did I know that this little elementary school kid would grow up to be one of my editors on a short story project in an anthology that I'm really, really stoked about. So all that said, there's a lot of love that went into this story, and I'm excited to see what a bunch of the other writers did with their stuff. And when it comes out, I'm sure that I'm going to read them all and do a whole bunch of videos on it. But definitely check out the Super Generation when it drops. I could not be more stoked for this project. Love you, Papaw. I miss you. To the rest of you, drive safe. See you out there.